All right, well, welcome everybody to the Ask the Experts town hall that we're going to be having on revitalizing the business climate in California. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Tom Piechota, the Vice President for Research here at Chapman University. There's certainly going to be an interesting discussion today, and we have a really great panel that was already warming up over the last 30 minutes. So I think you're going to be really interested in terms of what they have to say. But again, we want you as the attendees to really participate in this discussion and post questions to the panelists. There'll be a lot of time for you to do that. So feel free to post those questions into the Q&A portion, which you'll have access to. You can start doing that now. The panel will be making some remarks on the topic that we're talking about today. And then we'll move to question and answers. But I have a great colleague that's going to be the moderator today. It's Dean Thomas Turk. He's the Dean of the Argyros School of Business. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom to introduce the discussion for today and also the panelists. So thanks, Tom, for joining us.
Thank you, Tom. Welcome, I'm Tom Turk. I'm the Dean of the Argyros School of Business and Economics here at Chapman University, and delighted to welcome you to this event. This is the key topic facing California right now, the business climate. California has never been a discount place to do business. It's always had, or at least for the several past couple decades, has been highly regulated and create some complications, but it really appears that we've hit a tipping point here. The number of businesses that are leaving, the types of businesses that are leaving, whether it's large corporations or small businesses, the people that are leaving. I suspect everybody over Christmas had discussions with family members who are looking for places to move from California. And so I really think it's the concern about the business climate has really accelerated in the past couple of years. And it's got the attention of people in Sacramento as well. Obviously, this is going to have a devastating effect on tax revenues if the trend continues. It already has had a negative effect. And probably COVID-19 is going to exacerbate the problem. Businesses invested heavily in remote workforces. So you don't have to have as many people in California as you used to do business in California. So I suspect that's going to accelerate it. So we've got a panel here that is going to talk about what the issues are, what's causing this problem, and offer some constructive advice on what we can do to revitalize the business climate in California. And so let me start by just introducing our panel before I turn it over to him. Joel Kotkin, probably a lot of you know him. He's the Presidential Fellow here in Urban Futures. He's also the Executive Director of the Urban Futures Institute in Houston, Executive Editor of newgeography.com. In his spare time, he's written several books, including his latest is The Coming of Neo-Feudalism, a warning to the global middle class. This is something you'll want to have a stiff drink with you as you read. And you see his work everywhere. He's a regular contributor to Real Clear Politics, City Journal, Daily Beast, American Affairs, and more. If you cruise the net looking for news and opinion, you're going to stumble over some of his articles on a regular basis. So welcome, Joel. Marshall Toplonsky is a clinical assistant professor of management science here at Chapman University. He's also a research fellow at our Hoag Center for Real Estate and Finance. And he's a senior advisor to the Cicero Group, which is a leader in using big data for sentiment analysis. In his previous life, he was a managing director at KPMG. He was one of the founders of their Lighthouse Center for Excellence in Data and Analysis. And he's co-authored a few reports with Joel Kotkin. One was OC Focus, Forging Our Common Future, really trying to start the conversation on a coordinated policy to deal with the trends over the next 20 years facing Orange County, and California Feudalism, the squeeze on the middle class. So welcome, Marshall. Incidentally, as I introduce the panel, if you could please hold your applause till I've introduced everybody. Our third panelist is Lucy Dunn. She's the CEO and president of the Orange County Business Council and one of the most visible advocates for business in business community in Orange County. And she's somebody who has taken on all of the big challenges that face California, some might say hopeless causes, facing California, from homelessness to transportation to air quality to the business climate. She was on the California Transportation Commission, Director of Housing and Community Development. She helped develop Orange County's 10-year plan to end homelessness. And as I mentioned, has been an advisor to the South Coast Air Quality Management District, Southern California Association of Governors, and probably most important, a proud member of the Argyros School of Business Board of Counselors. So welcome, Lucy. Tracy Hernandez is the founding CEO of the Los Angeles Business Federation. This is an alliance of 180 business groups, trade organizations with over 400,000 members and representing employing 3.5 million people in Southern California, which I believe is all of them, right? I was looking at that. There can't be that many more people employed in Southern California than that. She's BizFed, as it's referred to, amplifies the voice of these business groups in public policy. She's also been a publisher of a number of newspapers, including the Los Angeles Daily News. She's active in all kinds of incredible charitable organizations, too many to mention, and she's gotten a bunch of prestigious awards that we won't list here. But welcome, Tracy. Jim Wunderman is the president and CEO of the Bay Area Council. And this is a CEO-led public policy and advocacy organization. It's been around since 1945. And they want to make the Bay Area the most innovative, compatible, and sustainable environment in the world. And since taking over as CEO in 2004, they focused on all the big issues: the business climate, housing, transportation, water, energy, cybersecurity, and more. And so we want to welcome Jim as well. And finally, we have Rob Lapsley. He's the president of the California Business Roundtable, which is a group of senior executives from major companies. It's a nonpartisan group representing over 500,000 Californians. He was previously the vice president and state political director for Cal Chamber, president of RCL Consultants, and a VP at Arnell Development, which is a company that we at the George L. Argyros School of Business and Economics are very fond of. So thank you, Rob, for joining us. But why don't I throw it over to Joel and Marshall to kick this off?
Okay. Marshall, you want to say something first?
Here we go. Let me put our slides up.
We're going to try to give you some of the basic reasons why we've been pushing some of these issues. It's really not a question of perception. You can't use a spin doctor. It's this is the real pathology. So let's just start off really quickly. I'll do a few and then Marshall will do a few. But this net migration issue, what is really happening is people are voting with their feet. And even though California is a fantastic place in many ways, people feel they can't survive here. Businesses are leaving, particularly some very large businesses. And the 2019 numbers appear to be worse. And remarkably, for the first time, we are seeing the population of California go down. We haven't seen that in the last, since at least 1900. And that's sort of unprecedented. Who's leaving? The group that's really leaving increasingly are young families, people in their 30s and 40s, usually in the middle income. The next slide. So if we take a look at domestic migration, this is net domestic migration. As you can see, California is very well represented here. New York, in terms of their percentage, is a little worse than us, but we're holding our own in terms of Los Angeles. San Francisco and San Jose have also lost domestic migrants, and it appears fairly likely, according to the demographers, that their populations also will start to decline. Los Angeles, by the way, has been losing population for several years now. And who's gaining it? I think everybody in the room, so to speak, will know this. People are moving to Phoenix, they're moving to Dallas, they're moving to Atlanta. The one place that they're moving to in California is the Inland Empire. But again, you can see the movement is to less expensive, lower tax, less heavily regulated places.
You know,
Go ahead.
Joel is showing the data related to people movement. And it's clear that we're losing our seed corn. We're losing that next generation of people who are going to create the wealth and continue the growth of California. When you look at that from a business perspective, the thing that pops out to you is the idea that we're competing against other areas. We don't just exist in a vacuum. There's a lot of mobility within the business community. People can start businesses, move businesses to wherever they want to move to. So the key is understanding that we live in a highly competitive environment. We have done a good deal of work at Chapman and have just recently come out with our focus on the innovation sector. The innovation sector is hugely important to California. In many ways, it's its signature accomplishment, having tremendous impact on the global economy. We've created an index that looks at businesses, jobs, and wages, and compares California markets to markets all across the United States. And what we're finding is that, with the exception of Silicon Valley, which is maintaining its leadership, some of the California markets are not ranked particularly highly. And from a competitive point of view, others are growing much, much more rapidly than we are. Specifically, we're starting to see places, this is a statewide view now as opposed to a market by market view, but we're seeing Arizona grow much more rapidly, Utah grow much more rapidly than we are. While we get an occasional spurt, this happens to be a chart of the businesses themselves as opposed to employment. So this is the number of business establishments. We're seeing California's largely be below the average of other states that have a lot of innovation activity going on. And the picture is not one of rosy growth. We're also seeing that translate into the other kinds of businesses besides innovation businesses, which is the professional, scientific, and technical services area. Those are where the high-paying jobs are outside of innovation. And they typically follow the money. When a business that is a technology business, like, say, Oracle decides to leave the state, or Hewlett-Packard Enterprises decides to leave the state, the lawyers, the accountants, the consultants, the people who are helping to underpin those technology businesses typically leave as well. This chart is showing you that California, generally speaking, with the exception of 2018, generally speaking, lags the other states that we're competing with in the innovation area. All of this is in the context of the overall job creation situation in California. Joel, do you want me to talk about this, or would you like to go through this?
This is probably the most important of all the issues that Marshall and I talk about, because it's one thing we even as we had rapid growth in high tech and in some high value added areas, overall middle class jobs and have not been popular. About 80% of our jobs that have been created in the last decade pay under the median income, and half of those pay under 40,000. And you can imagine it is not easy. So one of the things that Marshall and I have been following, particularly with COVID, is we've really have an economy that is basically bifurcated between a very high-end sector and a large hospitality, tourism, particularly here in Southern California. And those tend to be lower wage jobs, and now many of them have gone away. So that's why California ranks near the bottom in terms of jobs, in terms of unemployment during this. And of course, lastly, and I'm sure Jim will be able to deal with this better than me, the fact that these jobs can be done remotely encourages businesses and people to go somewhere else.
You know, the point of this session, and Tom Turk, I'm going to turn it over to you, but the point of this session is to really understand why this stuff is happening. You know, we're in many respects shooting ourselves in the feet. These are self-inflicted wounds. And to really explore what we can do to turn this around, because Tom, as you mentioned, we've hit a tipping point, and that's never a good thing when you start to see a trend accelerating.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you, Marshall and Joel. Lucy, I'm sure none of this surprises you. You're seeing this on the ground in the businesses you interact with on a daily basis. How do you respond to that, and what do you see are kind of some of the key drivers that are behind the numbers they have provided?
Yeah, I mean, I always rely on Joel and Marshall's research. There is absolutely nothing new here for us. It's just that they can tell it in such a compelling way, and it helps us advocate more for the systemic changes that we need, and thus this seminar. So thank you for including us. You know, the first thing I want to say is there's nothing like a good pandemic to reveal systemic flaws, right? I mean, what Joel and Marshall have done, none of this, as I just said, is new. We saw this before pandemic, and it's now just gotten exacerbated before it. So in my little 5 minutes, I want to first talk vaccines, because everybody needs to get vaccinated. We need to open sooner and safer. We don't trust our politicians for what they're saying to us, but I just want to get out there for all of the folks that have tuned in to just be patient. We're all learning about this as much as possible, and our businesses need to reopen as quickly as possible. We need increases in supply. The infrastructure's not in place to deliver these vaccines. We don't have the technicians. Plus, California has these weird union rules that make it even harder to get the right people on the ground. So that has to be alleviated, right? And then certainly the federal play now with a new administration, a changeover. So I just want to say, folks, get vaccinated. More super sites are coming. Be patient. Sign up on the app, Othena, OTHENA.com. And we'll get it done. But to the point of this discussion is, after we're vaccinated and we need to reopen full bang, right? The 3 pillars for us have always been at the Business Council, and I think any good economic development strategy for California recognizes. Number 1, you need a good supply, choices, and affordability of housing. 2, you need to be able to move people and goods with a good infrastructure plan, water, air quality, roads, infrastructure, tolls, et cetera. You need infrastructure that works and is efficient and effective. And the third is you need a good education system to prepare for a highly competitive global economy. My son's a Chapman graduate, go Chapman. So, and got a good education there, but we need to be able to elevate education in all fronts. So starting first with housing, and I'm going to screen share a slide here just to punctuate how nutty California is since we need 180,000 housing units every year and have since 1985, just based on predictable population growth, which in this case now we're declining. And now, damn it, Joel, we've just given environmentalists an argument. We don't need housing because we're losing people. Isn't that great? We can meet our climate change goals because we're losing people. Yay, California. Shoot. Okay, we need 180,000 housing units annually just for jobs creation and population growth. We haven't met that goal since 2005. When Governor Newsom spent his entire state of the state talking about housing and how he wanted to increase the state supply by 3.5 million, well, look what happened in 2020. We didn't even get to 180, let alone deal with the deficit. So housing supply throughout the state is critically important for so many reasons, because it is the best way for wealth creation. Our Black communities, Latino communities are at the lowest home ownership rates since the Great Depression in the 30s. And the rest of the nation is going through a housing boom, not California. So we need an economic development strategy to attract home builders to California. And we also need to think really clearly about the fact that our state will ask for 6 million acres for solar panels and begrudge 1 frickin' acre of new acreage for housing. That's wrong thinking. We need no more anonymous lawsuits to stop housing locally, no more serial lawsuits, one filed after another. And the remedy for any lawsuit against a proposed project needs to be more mitigation, and that's it. No more leveraging project labor agreements for unions, et cetera. So housing, number one. Second leg of the stool, an infrastructure. Look, we need to incentivize the good things that comes out of pandemic, right? Telework, telecommuting is one of those things. Helps reduce greenhouse gases. We're able to work, many of us still in this platform. And so you've got some state folks that are actually disincentivizing telework because they want you in their cars and they want housers to fund the transit infrastructure network that frankly was running empty before pandemic, but they don't have funding post-pandemic. We need to really think about our infrastructure system because if you can't move people and goods, you can't do business. And last, education. Clearly, we need to get our kids back to school. And the guidelines we've seen, not just for business, but for education, come on, we've got to have good guidelines that make sense, get our kids in school so that our parents can get back to work. So 3 quick things on the policy side, but then I'm going to add one more political thing, and then I will be quiet because I love the dialogue that we're going to get into. You know, this is a state that values union membership and public employee unions in particular. It's the DNA of California. They are able to fund and get their legislators to do their bidding to keep public employee unions going strong. They're also on the dole. They all got paid. Our small business community never faced pandemic. Is the only group that faced pandemic the hardest. Big businesses were able to sort of manage it, but the small business community is dying. We've got to figure out a way as business to start supporting legislators who govern for California. Govern for California, not govern for unions, not do union bidding. You got to represent the entire state, but we got to figure out a way. And you'll see Southern California come together with my friend Tracy Hernandez, Maria Salinas of LA Chamber, Paul Granillo of Inland Empire Economic Partnership. We're going to try to figure this one out. How can we be more effective in a political play to elevate Southern California and move our elected officials? So I will close with one more thing. The state of California, it's climate change 24/7. It impacts every one of those things I talked about: housing, infrastructure, education. Our climate change goals are incompatible with housing goals, infrastructure goals, education goals. And no one is talking about how to connect the dots. No one denies that we need to not address climate change. We do. But the way that they're written with 1960s thinking is not going to work. And the climate change goals will fail because Joel and Marshall just told us the climate change strategy for success is to depopulate California and send them all to Texas. How stupid is this? So we need people thinking in really strong and effective ways how to make those goals interconnect, translate, so we can lift all ships and all of the goals succeed. And with that, I will turn it back to you.
Well, thank you, Lucy. You know, Tracy, when I saw one of the graphs that Joel and Marshall shared that really caught my eye is the net migration out of Los Angeles. I believe it was 2.4 million, I think it was, from 2019. So obviously LA is ahead of the curve on all of the things that Lucy has just been talking about. So what are you hearing from your members as their primary concerns here, and what's driving this?
Dean Turk, thank you for having us in Los Angeles. Thank you for that awesome distinction. Leading at the worst, you talk about a tipping point, but that's all right. You know, that's why we're here. Business Federation, by the sound of it, is to unite and get as Lucy was referencing, organized labor has been organized for some time and has been successful in getting their agenda adopted. So it was time to change things and get the business community broadly organized so that we could mobilize in a consistent, disciplined, relentless fashion to get more attention from the office holders. And so that's what BizFed's for. As you mentioned, we're actually up at about 210 industry trade groups, chambers of commerce, minority business groups, women business groups, business improvement districts, you name it. So with over 400,000 companies coming together, employing nearly 4 million people, the point is to get civically active and engaged. Just as a reminder, you guys know this more than anyone else, on the natural, private employer actually fears government and everyone who represents government. It's a scary situation, right? Government holds authority over your permit, the way you can do business, the way you can employ people, you get audits and all of that. So we have to remember, on the natural, people who invest and own and operate businesses, employ people, want to avoid and stay away from government. Different than people who are in organized labor, who they're free and they're comfortable talking to elected officials and speaking up and expressing their opinion. So one, we do focus on how to educate business owners, when to get involved, how to get involved, literally who to speak to, on what point, that it will make a difference, and then get a myriad of numbers to do that all together, singing off the same song sheet. And sometimes that's boring and scary, and we've got bigger fish to fry because we have to compete. But that's what all of us here on the call are doing. When you set this up, it's like, how do we make a difference? And you said, how can business encourage government to listen? So a couple of things in that: being relentless and speaking up, training people how to get involved at times of decision making rather than complain afterwards. That's been more of our custom, right? Is to react after a law or fee's been put into place. So trying to get ahead of it. The other thing, though, is using traditional media, earned media, and social media in a more impactful way. We're finding that that ultimately is what gets the attention of elected officials when they get beat over the head by major media outlets, by major voices such as Chapman University, and then the social media platform. So I want to share with you a couple of things that we've learned. You asked, what's going on in LA and the greater LA region. So we poll all the time. Obviously, with that hundreds of thousands of business owners, we can't get them in a room to meet, whether it's Zoom or any other way. So we poll all the time. And most recently, we just came out with some results, and I'll tell you what has changed. This is asked specifically, what is your greatest concern for your operations in the next 12 months? So it's always like real time, like right now, your operations here in California, what are your biggest concerns impacting your ability to survive, compete, and thrive? Number one, for the first time, homelessness. And then that's going to dovetail into Lucy Dunn's relentless remarks about housing access and affordability, which drives and fuels homelessness. That's part of it, right? So housing access, affordability, and dealing with the homeless crisis. Number one, businesses are saying is their issue right now to survive and thrive in California. Number two, taxes and fees. And when we drill down in taxes and fees, you might be surprised. The number one tax, there's 5 major taxes that a business owner pays. Number one is income tax. In their ability to survive and thrive and stay in California, income tax. And because businesses are formed as LLCs and S Corps and so on, so your bottom line in that structure goes to you personally as the owner, and then you pay income tax. And we're at 13.9% here in the state of California. And then of course, followed by property taxes. Crime became number 3, interesting movement that has not been number 3 and hasn't been in the top 5 in quite a while. So dealing with crime, dealing with public safety, for our employees' safety, getting to and from work, for our customers feeling like they're safe to come to work, that has surfaced. 4, legislative gridlock, this whole being at loggerheads and the polarization of all of our public dialogue and conversation has reached a fervored high, I would say, and that's concerning for people that we're not going to be able to just calmly in a common sense way reach some good public policy conclusions. And the 5th one, Lucy hammered on too, is education and getting our kids back into school. Obviously, you all know and have heard anecdotally so many families having to choose. One parent has to choose to leave their job and stay home because they're homeschooling, they're basically homeschooling 3 kids because they can't go to school anymore. And how can you go to work and do your job and school your kids and make sure they're doing their tests? So that was number 5. A couple of specific items on people making decisions to grow in or out of the state. Obviously, we're the startup factory of the world. Every great idea thrives and incubates and comes to life here in California. We have sunshine every day of the year. We have the most, perfect climate, so it fosters wonderful creativity. But then when people choose, am I going to grow here or grow somewhere else? One thing that comes up all the time, labor and employment laws and regulations. The fact that our state has, in the last couple of years, and contractors of any nature, is literally causing major companies, small and large, to leave, because that's an employee-based as well as a contractor-based, plus many entrepreneurs are actually independent contractors. So it's crushing entrepreneurialism, crushing competitiveness and ability to move quick. So labor and employment laws we've got to deal with. The next thing is remote work, what COVID has done and now what post-COVID we're going to survive in. Our poll said, believe it or not, this is just 2 months ago, 82% of all businesses who answered our poll say they will continue to implement some form of remote work. 82%. So only 18% are going back to regular work as soon as they can post-COVID. 82% are going to have some people work remote or up to all people work remote. And so as a public policy, we have to deal with a lot of things. One specific example I'll give you is broadband access. Broadband access for everyone, reliability for everyone. But of course, then the issue that you can work from anywhere. And so will you choose to move out of the state? On a real localized item, Dean Turk, I would give you that resonates with everyone is basic plain old permit processing. And the fact that it's a simple thing, cities can speed up, and counties, they could streamline, they could harmonize, they could get it consistent. And ultimately the cost actually comes way down in that. If you could just have a reasonable process to get your permit approved, the rules would stay the same, you'd go through all the levels of access in a swift way, then the cost is the third thing. So that's consistency and permitting. And then obviously the vaccine adoption, Lucy Dunn is dead on that, is that we have to do that. I was just on a call with the chair of the LA County Board of Supervisors right before this call, Hilda Solis, talking about, here's the different twist. How can the private sector in simultaneous path work with the public sector to get vaccines into the arms of millions of people? And that should be the most common sense thing. It's fairly radical, and we're having a challenge at every entity with the county, but we did get some agreement to sort of parallel track and let the private sector engage to be a part of the solution. And then lastly, on a small business front, I'll just leave you with the fact that we should take advantage of Isabella Guzman, who's the new SBA administrator. She's an Angelino. She has been helpful, at least open to listening to business. And with the new administration is there's money that's being discussed. Biden just made an announcement today in one of his executive orders trying to push more money out to small businesses through the SBA. And let's utilize our friend Isabella Guzman as the administrator and get some traction. So I leave that for you.
Thank you, Tracy. Jim, you're up in the Bay Area, and to some extent, the argument's been, with Silicon Valley and the incredible innovation in infrastructure they've built up, they're somewhat insulated from some of this stuff. Has that been your experience, or are there similar concerns in the Bay Area?
Yeah, thanks, Tom and Joel and Marshall and Lucy and Tracy really hit on a lot of really key issues, covered a lot of ground, and I know that Rob will. Boy, if we're insulated, I don't know why I'm not sleeping at night, because the reality of the situation is that what's going on is pretty scary in the Bay Area, and it's different than anything I've seen before. So I run an association, as Tom, that you pointed out. We're made up of leaders of pretty major businesses, large businesses, medium-sized businesses. We have about 350 members, and as a group, they like to talk about issues, and some of them like to complain about the business climate and the way things are and so forth. And I think a lot of what they have to say is very real, because they're real, deal with the issues, a lot of the issues that Tracy just raised, the litigious, the promotion of litigation as a solution to problems, the HR rules, obviously taxation, the difficulty that businesses face in just trying to get something done. California is pretty unique, in how these things are applied. But on the other hand, it's been our region's been pretty successful, and there's been a lot of growth. And I think the Bay Area has, shown more growth than other parts of the state. And, frankly, on the income tax that Tracy mentioned, that income tax is responsible for about 3/4 of the state's general fund. And the Bay Area's got about 20% of the population, but 40% of that income actually comes out of the Bay Area. And about half of that comes from 1% of the population, amazingly so. So this is something the state really needs to be very concerned about, is, when the stock market's up and there's some IPOs, the state, amazingly in a pandemic, has a surplus unique to other states and to local government, which is struggling. But when, we all remember back when Arnold Schwarzenegger became governor, and then when Jerry Brown became governor, we had these massive deficits. So that's a function of this sort of structural problems we have in our taxation. But getting back, in talking to the business leaders, historically we have a lot of conversations about these things, but it's been really different in the last year to 2 years. And it was pre-pandemic when this started to happen, especially on the issue of homelessness, just completely out of hand, feeling of lack of control, more and more money going into it, taxes raised to address it, no sense of improvement. And yeah, I think an unwillingness on the part of local governments to really grapple with the problem and dealing with the politics of that. But then, going further along as we get into the pandemic period, what we heard about before was people talking about leaving, people, talent, it's too expensive. The housing issue that Lucy brought up, probably the biggest driver of that, just too expensive to make it in this place. Young people come from all over the country and the world to make their way in Silicon Valley and get their start and get maybe a VC deal and those kinds of things. And then suddenly they get a little older, they want to settle down, maybe have a family, and even with a good income, can't afford to live in the place and have to start thinking about making other plans. So this was going on for a while, but when the pandemic came in, this issue around remote work really had kind of like a steroidal effect, because now things changed. Suddenly companies who were willing to pay people more because they needed to consolidate them in this Bay Area location, people felt like, well, companies felt we have to be there. Suddenly they don't have to be there. They can strategize around other alternatives, and maybe they can save some money by having their people work in these second tier cities that Joel showed in the slide as being the places where populations are going. And the people do better because now they can afford a house. They can have a little better lifestyle in another place, go back and be back with the family and maybe a community where they were raised. So this is a trend that's new and it's very, very different. And just saw an article about venture capital, in which venture capital, which was about 50% of the venture capital in the whole country, it has been invested in California throughout the history of venture capital, with about 40% of about 80% of that total in the Bay Area, because you needed to be close to the VCs to get investments. With Zoom, that's changed, and suddenly it's becoming nationalized and globalized. So that's going to change, I think, markedly this situation. But in talking with people, whether it's talented people or any people or companies large and small, we started to hear serious conversations taking place about strategies to leave. And amongst our members, we have the top accounting and audit firms. We've got the biggest consulting firms, commercial real estate firms, law firms. And what they say is their whole business practices are being built up around folks leaving. This is what keeps me up at night. And then, more than just people talking about it, the companies started to make announcements. And so, we lost Charles Schwab, we lost McKesson. Okay, maybe some, older companies and so forth. Suddenly, HPE, maybe the founding company of Silicon Valley, announces a move to Texas, followed by Elon Musk saying, I'm personally out of California. I'm taking my foundation with me. California has grown complacent in how it treats business. And then the surprise announcement by Oracle on a Friday afternoon, which, it's a pretty important company to make this kind of a decision. But it's not only headquarters moves like those kind of moves. We're also seeing divisions of companies, more quietly growing in other places. We're seeing a lot of focus on Texas and Austin in particularly, where a lot of the companies in the Bay Area are developing big campuses and so forth. So this is very, very real. And we know that, and then there's the young companies, early stage companies. They may still start in the Bay Area, but when they reach 12, 15 people and they're ready for a Series A or a Series B, they go somewhere else to do the growth. So, we know that this is very, very real, and we're trying to put the data around it. You saw some of it. It's indicated in the population growth. In San Francisco, since the pandemic, over 100,000 people, it's 800,000 population, signed up with the post office to change their address outside of San Francisco. It's kind of like a ghost town there. It's sad to see, what's happening. And it's kind of hard to imagine the Bay Area doing well when its most iconic city is, people are fleeing. And it's really questionable, as Tracy pointed out, in that 82% number of, companies continuing remote work. We don't really know what the number will be, but it's predictable that it's going to be a lot more than it would have been now that companies are seeing that they could do this. So this is very, very concerning, but denial has never been stronger in the state capital. This isn't happening. It's just a few companies, and for everyone that leaves, another one is created, and not to worry. So maybe they're not worried, but we are. And I think the solution has to be, as I said, we're reaching out, and I know, I've reached out to everybody here. We need to build a business coalition. The trite expression is, you're either at the table or you're on the menu. And I don't think it's in any question that business has been on the menu. And whether it's taxation or regulations or law, or just the sort of mean treatment of business, as if the folks who create the jobs and make the investments in people and in communities are somehow doing something wrong. And when the tax bill comes and that 13.3% rate is there and the higher corporate tax rate there, it's only logical that you do reach a tipping point. It's like, at some point, the value and the benefits of being in California, which, we all came here, right? Like some of you were born here. I came here, because this was the place to be, and I wasn't alone in doing this. It was called the California Dream. And it's at risk. And the first population decrease in the state's history since they started recording this, people should be extremely alarmed. So we're meeting with our state legislators to say, look, you have to pay attention to this. I think the governor and his office, they have to pay attention to this. And they're not going to do it unless we force them to do it, because this is it's another inconvenient truth. Politically, this goes up against the demands of organized labor and other groups who are hungry for support that they think they can only get by raising taxes and putting more demands on business. And I think I could say unequivocally, if this trend continues and more tax measures are passed, and that 13.3% becomes as 15%, or the corporate tax, there's a bill, AB 71, to raise the corporate tax rate. If those things are taken seriously and go through, I think the flight that we're seeing is going to be, it's going to have a steroidal effect on what's already on the table. And I think once you lose this, it's hard to get it back. It's not going to come back overnight. And we could truly see California become kind of a second tier economy instead of, the economy we've been really proud of. So somehow or other, I think business, needs to be in the lead on, some of the things that the government, and other sectors of society want to see happen. We're all for that. We want to have a clean environment. We want to have workers who are treated fairly. We don't want to beat up on consumers. I think we all have to come together around some issues, but there has to be respect for business on the other side. And it's going to be up to us to provide that kind of leadership and join with other groups and form collaborations and so forth. And it's easy for us to blame those other groups or blame the politicians and so forth. But I always tell my members, if you want to see the problem, just find a mirror, take a look, because you'll see it. Because I think we've been complacent. And I think we've been defensive, and we've had a lot to be defensive about. We keep getting ballot measures thrown at us. We keep having to, defend, just to maintain stasis. So I think we're going to have to bring the game to these folks, and it's going to be a little bit different. And I think it's going to make some people uncomfortable. But I believe our members are prepared for that. I personally am, and I hope to join with all of you in this and create a state that we can all be proud of. And this isn't just helping business people or businesses succeed. This is about everybody. This is creating that California that actually achieves the kind of goals I think that the folks in the elected class really want to see happen. But you got to have a dose of reality, and progressivism, it has to include accountability, and I don't think it has. and it needs to start to. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, Rob, I wanted to ask you a question before we get to the questions. There's a ton of questions coming in, as you guys have probably observed. But we've been talking, several of the panels have been talking about how devastating this is to small businesses, but you represent, or you work with the largest corporations in the state. What are there issues unique to them that you're seeing that we haven't talked about yet? And I think you're on mute.
So again, thank you for the opportunity to be here and you know, to always be with my colleagues and, you know, with Marshall and Joel, because they lay out so clearly exactly what the challenges are. You know, there are those obviously challenges for big business, but let's be clear, they can weather a lot of those challenges. But what you see right now with the CEOs who sit on my board, you know, their focus is on wanting to be able to make progress for all businesses. That's really where we are putting all of our time and attention. And it's about being able to have the quality of life that will ensure that we can continue to attract capital, investment, and be able to have a marketplace that's going to be vibrant and is going to be able to, you know, create the quality of living for all Californians that, you know, we have had in the past, but really now is threatened because, you know, you look at who's been decimated in this pandemic economy, you know, our hourly wage workers through especially a couple of core sectors like tourism have been decimated, restaurants decimated. And then you look at, okay, you know, if the government's making those decisions that are directly impacting all of them, then what are we doing to help them? And then you look at the health, and we have major, you know, questions as to whether state government can do the job. Look at EDD. You know, we pushed out $113 billion worth of benefits, but we have been very clear with some of our research. You know, we're over $10 billion in fraud. That's going to be an issue for, you know, legislators who are going to want employers to have to pay that back at some point in time. We haven't even scratched the surface of some of the issues that are going to be coming when you look at how we keep, you know, unemployment insurance solvent and what it's going to mean, you know, for future job growth. So we are tracking and are on top of all those issues so that we can try and set the stage. But let me add on to just a couple points that have been laid out so very well this morning and why your forum and this discussion is so critical, because you don't see it show up, you know, really in any other places. And thank you for Chapman's leadership on this. You know, the key now moving forward is we have kind of a window here, the next 2 years. There's no mistake that there's a recall going on in California of Gavin Newsom. And we just talked about why a lot of those reasons, or why a lot of the issues that we just went over are the reasons for that recall. People are frustrated. People are unsure of their futures now. We have the highest cost of living in this country, bar none. But they don't feel like the legislature or the governor is in touch with kind of really what's going on. Yeah, you know, we have fortunately a big surprise that we have a budget surplus again this year. Phenomenal because of, you know, Silicon Valley and part of our job generators. But that a lot of that's coming, as we know, through capital gains. Jim touched on that. So what's going to happen when that slows down? We're going to get bailed out by the federal government. We will soon see. But, you know, if there's no feeling that there are policies being promulgated by the governor or the legislature that are going to address some of these core issues, they will talk all day about throwing more money at the problem, like the governor did for 2 hours in his budget rollout. But do you really see a corresponding, you know, effort to be able to change the policies that will truly address these issues? And the answer is you don't. You see a legislature that looks completely out of touch with their constituents. And you see a governor who, is working to try and take care of the pandemic out of fairness to him. But did you see the corresponding policies, like through his economic recovery task force that he convened, to truly be able to make a difference in individuals and businesses' lives, that show them they're on top of it, they know what needs to be done, and regardless of what they care about with the unions or anything else, they're going to do the right thing? And the answer is you haven't seen any of that. Instead, we're getting policies like Cal OSHA, where they don't even listen to the very people they are supposed to be regulating, and they are promulgating policies on Cal OSHA and new regulations that actually directly impact and threaten the vaccine rollout that they're trying to accomplish right now. As Lucy said, they're not connecting the dots. So this is our greatest challenge. We have an opportunity here in the next 2 years. The governor, it's a recall, maybe, but most importantly, it's a re-election. And we as a business community have got to come together and stand up and unify and send all of these messages and be crystal clear with this governor in this environment that the policies have to go along with the politics. And we have got to be able to set a stage and tell folks moving forward that there's going to be this kind of future opportunity. They hear them, they understand it, and they're going to do something about it. And again, we haven't seen that. And I'll leave lastly one other thing is when you look at future investment and venture capital, as Jim was talking about, we've had a significant drop off in venture capital. Like I said, they're starting to move to other states as well. That's going to hurt us without a doubt. But one of the biggest messages that can be sent is, and from, again, a certainty standpoint, is around taxes. Are we going to increase the personal income tax? Most importantly, venture capital started to move when we started talking about a wealth tax, ladies and gentlemen, a wealth tax. When the legislature started last year and said, we're looking at this, and all of a sudden, from a CEO level, an investor level, everyone's like, whoa, wait a minute. That is now something that is going to change my behavior. And so watch that issue closely. Now, to his credit, the governor is saying in his budget, he will not support a wealth tax. And he said that he's not going to support an increase in the personal income tax. So there's the first positive signals that we have seen, and we're trying to resonate that out to people. But that doesn't mean the legislature won't do it. And it certainly won't mean the unions won't try and do it at the ballot box. And if people see these kind of proposals coming, that even in the face of a major surplus, we just had to defeat a split roll property tax, largest property tax increase in California history. But now they're going to see on top of that, corp tax increases or wealth tax or more personal income tax to fund what? Because their people are not seeing return on their services, especially with schools being closed. It will drive an increased exodus out of California, and it will not result, or will result in, a lack of investment and job growth in this state without a doubt. So with that, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and look forward to questions.
We've got a bunch of questions, but Rob, I wanted to follow up with what you said. One of the questions out there is, if the people that are leaving the state are the ones that are concerned about higher taxes, regulation, unions, trial lawyers, et cetera, isn't that going to just reduce political pressure, make us even more of a blue state and less sensitive to the issues of the business community?
Well, I think we're going to find out, because, if, as obviously, for every major iconic corporation like an HP or, McKesson or, whomever is next departs, you haven't seen a major comment from the governor or his staff that those matter, right? And, the governor, in fact, said a very interesting comment a couple of weeks ago in a media interview. when he got asked about those companies leaving, large companies, the migration, the governor's response was, well, California's economy looks really good for billionaires. Okay, what kind of response is that? You know, that's not California's economy either. And for every company who says they're leaving, as we know quietly, there's others who have already departed. But most importantly, what they're not doing is growing jobs here. So I have some of my members, case in point, who have reduced by thousands and thousands of employees in this state to neighboring countries or neighboring states. Why? Because they can service the California market. They can do what they need to do to maintain market share, but they can reduce their costs by less than half if they push their employees to Nevada or Arizona. So I watched this with them, and this doesn't really get talked about, but it absolutely is real. And it's actually a bigger share of what's happening. And then the last thing is, is the governor and the legislature going to shut down, like for energy exploration, fracking? We have 250,000 good paying oil jobs in the energy sector. They're going to just cut those jobs out now, in this kind of economy moving forward, over the next few years. That's what they're talking about. That's what they're going to be trying to push. What kind of signal does that send? So those are the things we're dealing with collectively.
Yeah. Lucy, you had mentioned the strategy of driving people out of California is kind of to Texas, and it's not even Texas anymore now. Tennessee, I think, is like #1 on the U-Haul list. South Dakota even is booming. But one of the questions was kind of as a devil's advocate, why isn't this good news? If we don't have the infrastructure, the energy, the water, the housing to support 40 million people, why isn't it good news that people move out of California?
Yeah, it is. I love this question. And it's really a good question for Kotkin and Toplansky on the demographic side. So I'm going to defer to them, but I will share with you from the business side. As a global, you cannot be in business and not look globally, right? You have to see where other countries are. And we watch Germany, an aging population, try to attract young families to come in, because if you're not growing, you're dying. It's just, Europe has been struggling with this for a generation. And California, particularly Orange County, we're an aging county where our largest age cohort is going to be 65 plus in just a few years. So that just exacerbates the divide between our service employees and those retiring at home and living till 120 years old. Like, that's what the actuaries are saying, right? That we're going to be living longer. And we're a healthcare super site. So we've got great healthcare to allow us to live longer. But when you can't attract young families to stay and grow high-paying jobs to stay, then you're looking like Hawaii. And it's the very rich and the very poor, and a group on the dole and the people in retirement. But the great statistics come from Joel and Marshall. So I would ask them to jump in and share on that.
Well, let me point out one thing, Lucy, and pose it as a rhetorical question. If you're not growing and your population base is dropping and your state is funded largely through personal income tax, who pays the public employee pensions?
Exactly.
Who pays the raises in cop pay, or the people that even us old folks who are now living in our old folk paradise would like to be able to continue to employ? Who pays that? So if you don't grow, you die. I totally agree with it. So this is an attack on growth as a strategy. And I don't know of a successful example of a de-escalating, spiraling down of based on outmigration and negative growth that you can point to and say, hey, I want to live there.
Right.
Yeah, I
And
just
so
wanna
let
add-
me add one more, if I can
Oh.
add one more thing, just to follow on with Marshall. This is a strategy that environmentalists raise because they don't want any more building. But I want to remind you all, the state of California has about 100 million acres. 50% of our state is owned by the state or federal government as perpetual open space. Yosemite, Mojave Desert, the Redwoods, 50% is owned in perpetual open space. 45% of our state is in agricultural production and private open space. Basically 6 million acres is commercial, residential, and industrial development for 40 million people. Give me 1 million more acres and I'll fix your housing crisis.
Right.
And there's still plenty of land for open space and recreation and the birds and the bunnies and the bees. So we have room to grow. All yours, Joel.
I just want to just really quickly, one of the interesting points from following up on Lucy is when these people don't come, which is really what's happening, the out-migration is really not as important as the in-migrants who aren't coming. If you want, the Jim Wondermans of today are going somewhere else. But the other thing is when those people either leave California or don't come, it's not like their carbon footprint disappears. Actually, I know when we were considering years ago moving to Houston, I know my carbon footprint would have doubled just by the fact of running the air conditioner all the time. So that's the other thing. The two very important things, just besides families, we're doing a study right now on the foreign migration of foreign born. And essentially, the LA area is basically going negative on foreign born. We're getting very little growth. Foreign born have driven this state economy. The Bay Area is flattening out. And where are the foreign born going? They're going to Dallas, they're going to Austin, they're going to Nashville, they're going to the same places that our young people are going. So it's not just the absolute demographics, it's who's going, because let's face it, what drives the California economy as much as anything else are immigrants and the foreign born and their families. And if they stop coming, we're in big trouble.
Tracy, I had, a number of years ago, I chaired the Regulatory Relief Task Force for City of Anaheim. And one of the things I noticed is there's lots of research on what the federal government can do to, increase or decrease economic activity. There's even additional stuff at the state level. But for a lot of businesses, it's the local level that is the key problem. They're the ones that are holding up the permits, that aren't letting you expand. And you see during this pandemic, the difference between, say, for the example, the way Los Angeles has handled that versus Orange County versus the city of Orange has a significant impact on the economic vitality of the location. So are there some things that you think LA can do to reverse some of the problems that we've described here?
Oh, I have a list that's 20 pages long, but that's great. Thanks for the question. The thing is, though, local government, so we're talking about city councils and mayors. There's 88 cities in LA County alone, and then the unincorporated area, is if they would just open their ears and their eyes and then not overcomplicate everything. Because if we could just take best practice and then spread it like wildfire, right? So the city of Long Beach, for example, has got a lot of creative things that are going. They're actually building housing I'll just do one example. Mm-hmm. And so why wouldn't every other city just take what they've done and implement it? And then have consistency so that when the businesses are in multiple cities in LA County, which is quite frequent, right? There's 88 cities. And so you do business from one to the other. So one, harmonize or be consistent jurisdiction to jurisdiction. That would be tremendous. One, you don't have to take forever. You don't have to do a study. You don't have to spend years on it. You know the best practices, implement them. For example, SCAG in Southern California Association of Governments, 191 cities in Southern California, 6 counties, have a resolution coming to their board, and it is to harmonize broadband delivery, permitting, fees, infrastructure, because you either have to lay fiber or you have to put cells, small cells, big cells, or you have to put satellites in the air. You have to cut up curbs and gutters, right? So why not all 191 cities adopt a resolution? They're recommending it. This is where they all got together. The county supervisors did, the city mayors did, and so on. So we'll see if it gets passed in 2 weeks. We're advocating strongly for a yes. And they say, let's harmonize all of our fees, our process, our permitting to get broadband access to everyone, rural and city and otherwise. And if as a region, we open those doors. Now those governments don't have to spend any money. The private sector is going to spend the billions of dollars. So it's highly productive. Just let the private sector do what they need to do, can do, serves the needs of the public. It's a pure equity play as well, closing the digital divide so everyone benefits from it. Use private money, and the government just has to adopt consistent permit processing with so it's expedited and it's consistent, and universal fees. And then everyone adopts and goes, and we could solve some big problems. So that example on broadband could be applied, time and time again. And then you would see, one, again, put private capital to use. You don't need the taxpayers' money. You just need the elected officials to agree to it, and then hold the departments accountable. And I want to tell you one more thing. Someone mentioned paying for the public pensions and the impacts on the budgets, right? And so all our local governments are already seeing impacts on governments, right? And they're looking at police and fire and city street services, tree cutting, sewer, all of that stuff. So now our city departments are already cutting staff. What does that do to the expedited streamlining process of permits and fees? Boom, screeching stop, because now they've just cut all the employees that will process and expedite those fees. So again, private sector, always just about like getting it done. We have private sector companies saying they will pay for city staff to work overtime or extra time to stay on to process these permits so they can get at the business. And yet some cities don't just say yes, and they don't take it and run, which is really quite mind-blowing. So there's a couple of examples, Dean Turk.
Jim, and maybe all of you want to weigh in on this one. There have been a number of questions about what can you do to keep the kind of the young families from moving out, to incentivize the college graduates that we're creating to stick around, and the ones interested in building families do it and make this attractive place. And the reason I mentioned, Jim, you're up in the Bay Area. There's I assume is a particular problem there.
Well, thanks. So the slide that Lucy showed, should get everybody pretty worked up, because we know the kind of housing we have to produce to manage population growth and job growth based on projections, and we just haven't done it. And there's a myriad reasons for it, but at this point in time, so the governor says he recognizes the problem and dedicated his State of the State message 1 year ago to it. So okay, what's the plan to make that happen, and how do you produce housing that people can actually afford? So you have to figure out what kind of housing do people actually want, and what can you build at an affordable price, and how can you provide some supports to enable to do it? So, number one is, ease up on, there's been a lot of bills to try to ease up on CEQA, because CEQA just makes things way more costly and way more delayed. And the building trades unions are heavily resisting changes to CEQA because they use CEQA to sue the developers of projects to attain project labor agreements, which then raise the price. Now, in some cases, it's good, it's fine. There's certain kind of developments where, you can use, highly skilled and trained labor, but for a lot of what needs to be built in the housing stock, you don't necessarily require that. And the cost of it is way out of line. And, what you end up having is no housing that gets built because it just doesn't pencil out. So, we need a lot of housing to get built. I think we need to demonstrate to the young people that there is a future. There's no reason we shouldn't be able to build units of housing in the Bay Area for $300,000 or $400,000 cost per unit to build. In other parts of the country, that'd be seriously expensive. But in the Bay Area, that would be seriously cheap because it costs about $700,000-800,000 to produce a unit of housing. The fees in most cities and counties on just to put a shovel in the ground are somewhere between $100,000 to $150,000 just to start building. All the stuff you have to go through just to get to the starting line. That is crazy. And then, the liability that gets stuck on that, the developers have to consider, the fact that we require our new housing to subvent affordable housing rather than that be a requirement of society. We stick that on the housing developer, and so they have to absorb those additional costs. So you take that unit that in a normative way would cost a few $100,000 to build, and you double the price of it, but with all the things that you stick. And because the market's not there, we don't have people who can afford that housing. It's not going to get built, can't get sold. And so, you've got market dysfunction. And so let's get real about what the nature of the market is. Here in the Bay Area, there's this passion for transit-oriented development and building a kind of housing that is really very, very attractive, but that is more expensive and that not everybody wants. In some cases, people want to have a single-family home, and yet somehow we've decided that single-family homes are bad. We've decided that cars are bad. We shouldn't have cars. We should require people to all use public transit. It's great when people can. We're big advocates for public transit, but a lot of people depend on a lifestyle that includes an automobile or a truck in order to make their living. And so we're putting tremendous rules and costs on the housing sector, which make it impossible to get things built. I think that this is, a lot of our members say this is really the biggest issue, even with all the other stuff, that the fact that their employees can't look out and get look to a future and look at other places and say, for the same amount of money, I could get 3 times the house. And now in the pandemic, people aren't quite as enamored with, living in a very small quarters and having the shared amenities anymore, because, we're not supposed to share. So, people are looking for more space. And so we have to acknowledge, it's a change in the market. It's a change in the environment. I think overall, for everything that we're talking about, with all of the well intentions of California, this requires a big rethink. If we want to achieve these climate goals, it's one thing to have the goals. It's another thing to think about how do you achieve them in a way that's actually workable, which doesn't lead to California's energy costs being 40% higher. And by the way, that's another big cost of housing. We have much stricter rules in California on when we build housing on energy, and then the local governments add to it. And politically, it's just really populist. Like, I mean, we're going to have more rules. We're going to do them more. We're going to do them faster. And we better, we had an ad that we put out to the public through digital advertising, and it basically said, "Whoa. Let's slow down here for a second. Before we continue down these paths, let's rethink, reevaluate what we're doing before we're too late and we lose this." So, I think the opportunities are absolutely there. There's modular housing that can be brought in at much lower costs. There's all kinds of approaches that we're seeing, but there's resistance to everything. And ultimately, the society has been very, very difficult. There's been a tremendous political movement on all fronts to resist the development of housing, and it's an embarrassment, and it's something we need to absolutely change.
Hey, Jim,
Lucy,
yeah, Tom, can I give you a little,
Yep.
Ditto. Bless you, brother. Great information on the housing thing, Jim. A little practical solution to your question of how do we keep our young people here? Because the housing play is clearly systemic, but a practical solution would be to encourage our business leaders on the call today to remember that if they're in Chapman University, they're here already. Somehow they're housed. And so we want to keep the young people that are already in our education system here and not have them go out of state. And so if our businesses could offer them internships or even mentorships, and not just necessarily start at the college level, but think about it at the high school level to get them understanding how business works and operates. So I would encourage, as a practical, really, you can do this today. Remember, we've got great educational institutions already right here producing unbelievably great talent. Let's keep them here because they're already here. Somehow they're already housed. Don't let them leave. Give them an internship, offer them a mentorship, and I think this will be a big help for you.
Yeah, we've talked about, of course, housing. If you're talking about young families, the two things that they consume is they have more people, so they need bigger houses, but it's also education. And I think during the pandemic, those that are quasi homeschooling their kids in elementary school have become increasingly alarmed by the content of the education that they get in California, increasingly concerned about public education. And I think that's another factor. In addition to the higher taxes, the higher housing prices, you also have lower quality public education at the elementary and high school level than a lot of the other alternative states that people are looking for. Well, we're rapidly coming to the end here, and what I want to do is maybe just get 1 or 2 minutes from each of you to kind of give you our closing thoughts on the subject. Why don't we start with Jim?
Sure. First, again, thank you and Chapman for doing this. And one of the things I think is really important is to me it shouldn't be because it's so obvious what's happening. We shouldn't have to prove this case, but I think that we do. Everywhere we go, there are deniers, and so I think developing the information to be able to show the flow of jobs to other places and the economic and fiscal impacts that go with it are going to be extremely important. We've got to show not just people concerned about business per se, talking to ourselves, but the greater population that, if you're concerned about economic equity, if you're concerned about your kids' future in the state, if you're concerned about hollowing out of the middle class, if you want to solve this problem, we're going to have to recognize that there is a problem and that it's something that gets solved. I just saw a note that Samsung is looking at expanding with a huge investment into Texas. They should be looking at expanding into California. I think if President Biden does what I think he's going to do, which kind of follows up on what President Trump was trying to do, going to try to bring manufacturing back on shore. Will manufacturing come to California under these circumstances when it takes so long to get a plan up and going and so forth? So I think we need to have a serious rethink of the situation, and we need to bring data to bear, and I think you guys can really help. And I think just by having this conversation, we need to have more like it, and we need to make jobs and the future of California subject number one, and make that the politically populist thing to talk about, and have folks who are interested in driving solutions, from the governor to the legislator to the world of academia, really focus in so this becomes like the thing. And we're going to try as hard as we can to do that, and I look for help from my colleagues here and others around the state to make it happen.
Tracy?
I just encourage everyone here to do one thing, because sometimes when you're at a forum and you hear so many ideas and you hear the challenges, the concerns, and the solutions, it can be a bit mind-boggling. And with all the expertise here, coming from Chapman, from the California Business Roundtable, the Bay Area Council, Orange County Business Council, and BizFed, is that we can all direct you to do one thing, to speak up. And so it does take action. And this state is a state of action. Many people are mobilized and do that. It's just the voices that we're talking about here, the concepts that are being discussed and some of the common sense aspect is not spoken enough and consistently in a variety of platforms. So I would ask everyone, that would be my request, is to just plug into one of us here, and then we can help you speak up on one thing. And if 130 people do that today, that will beget another 130 and so on, and we will change things.
Rob.
So yeah, I'm going to expound a little bit on Tracy's comments. So, because I'm looking ahead to, our future business leaders who you are training today, and, hopefully we have with us on this call. And it's that as you progress and move into the private sector, if you're interested in leading companies in the future, obviously, number one, you want to be able to be a leader and looking out for your employees and being able to have the best possible policies that will attract and retain your employees. That's almost a given for any business leader. But the other side of this equation is, and this is Tracy's point, you have to be engaged as a business leader now in understanding public policy, and don't think for a second that as a business leader, if you're in tech, you're a global citizen and you shouldn't be engaged at the state level or your local, government level on trying to impact policies that are going to help not just your company, not just grow jobs, but really the whole fabric of your communities and your state. You have to be able to look at the leadership from both sides of this equation now. Because if you don't do that, then obviously you are going to be missing such a critical factor, in what you can do for all of California moving forward, but also for future Californians, your kids, grandkids, and it's incumbent upon you as you take on these huge, next steps of responsibility to be able to help lead. So please consider that if you need to take classes or engage, like you said, with internships, so you understand how that works and what our government does and how we can help you, learn about that so you're ready to be able to work from both sides of this equation in your future roles. And we wish you all the best, as future leaders. And you started at a great place with Chapman, that's for sure. So, best wishes moving forward.
Lucy.
Thanks so much for this, you guys. And like ditto to all of my colleagues on this webinar. It's really revelatory how much great information was here. It's almost a masterclass of what needs to be reviewed a couple times to gather so much of the content that you pulled together today, Tom. So thank you. I will end with what I began with. And that is, there's nothing like a good pandemic to reveal systemic flaws, nothing at all. And we know business leaders are uncomfortable engaging in politics. They're uncomfortable in doing anything outside of their wheelhouse of their expertise in the business that they're in. But the California dream is at risk. And the fact that the market is so large in California, you can't ignore it. You just presume somehow you're going to win the lottery and be successful here. It's at risk. And the emperor finally is being disclosed as having no clothes. All this great progressive strategy is great, but it's doesn't produce what they say it's going to produce. So I'm going to encourage you again to do what Tracy has offered, Rob has offered, Jim has offered. That's why our organizations exist, is to give you the cover as leaders, to be able to say things that perhaps you can't say so you can get your business done. And we can all work together trying to rekindle that great California dream, which is why you're here in the first place, and allow our next generation to grow and thrive here as well. So thank you for this opportunity. And I know we'll all be in touch.
Great, thank you. Marshall, you have any thoughts?
You know, Tom, my thought is that when I teach my courses, and I think about business education, you know, never before have we seen a more interconnected world. You know, it used to be kind of okay to sit down and say, look, the role of business is to maximize value to the shareholder. But life has changed. We live in a much more interdependent society. What we're dealing with here is a breakdown of civic will that has really come from people focusing solely on making their business as wealthy as possible and ignoring the situational dynamics that they live in. So what we really need here is to kind of restore some sense of perspective that we're part of a community and be able to say to ourselves, look, if the world that we're in doesn't collectively win, I am not really doing my job. And so that's kind of the next mission that we have as existing business people and as business educators, to try to basically create a broader context for people to succeed in.
And Joel.
Okay, I know we're running out of time, so I'll go real fast. But basically, what do I think we really need to do is recast the issues that affect our business world in the context of social justice and the environment. We need to have policies that actually work. As Lucy pointed out, the pandemic has given us an enormous opportunity to cut greenhouse gases by having people work at home well beyond anything that we would have seen before. And we also have to recognize that this society of California, if it continues to go in this direction, will become increasingly feudalized, increasingly hostile. We'll have increasing not only homeless, but all sorts of other social unrest. The reality is the best social justice is producing great jobs, and that's what our businesses should be allowed to and encouraged to do.
Thank you. Thank you to all of the panelists. Before I turn over to Tom to wrap up, just, you know, as we're going through this, it's easy to get a little bit depressed as we have this kind of dark future, but that's really not the theme of this discussion. I think the takeaway from this discussion is that this problem is real, it's urgent, and it's fixable. And so working, you know, with universities, with the organizations that you represent, with the business community, we have an opportunity to engage local, state, political leaders to fix the problem, to become a magnet for innovation and opportunity once again. And so I want to thank you guys for providing kind of the insight. And Tom, if you're out there, would you like to wrap it up?
All right, I am here, and I want to say a big thanks to Tom and the panel also for really a great discussion, and it was really an interesting one, and I think the questions that came in, it was really great to see be able to answer a lot of the questions. Sorry if we weren't able to get to all those, but I think what I heard everyone say on the panel and Tom is, I think any one of these people would be happy if you reached out to them and if you wanted to talk to them about any of these issues. I think these are people that are very passionate about the topic that we're talking about today, and I think they would love to hear from you and talk to you about this topic. So thank you again all for attending. Thanks to Terrence Stroop and Amy Stevens for working, and Manaz Ascaria for working behind the scenes. And we hope you can join us for future Ask the Experts as we talk about various topics going on in our community. And thank you all, and stay well and stay safe. Bye-bye.